There's a voice we all know. It's quiet at first, like the tick of a clock in the background, faint, familiar, easy to ignore until it's the only sound you hear, and then it becomes a kind of background hum, like static, but personal. It says things like you're lazy, or you just don't have what it takes, or you're not trying hard enough. Sometimes it pretends to be your own voice, and other times it sounds like the echo of someone from your past. Maybe a teacher, a parent, a boss. Maybe even someone you loved who didn't know any better, and here's the painful part. That voice rarely shouts. It doesn't need to. It just waits, quietly weaving itself into your thoughts until you believe that it's the truth. You might hear it when you can't get out of bed in the morning, even though you desperately want to. You might hear it when you sit down to start that project you've been dreaming about, and yet, something stops you. You scroll, you tidy, you make coffee again, you do anything except begin, and then the voice returns, lazy, undisciplined, what's wrong with you? But let me offer you a reframe, not as a slogan or an excuse, but as a doorway into something deeper and truer. You are not lazy. You've just learned in ways that didn't fit the shape of your soul. I say this not to flatter you, but because it's time someone told you the truth. Think about how most of us are introduced to learning, growth, and productivity. From the earliest age, we're handed a system, a map, not one drawn for us, but for everyone, uniform, standardized, and with it comes the unspoken message, if you don't fit this way, the problem is you. We're told to sit still, focus on what's in front of us, memorize facts that may never touch our lives. We're measured by tests, timed by bells, and trained to perform, not to understand. Creativity is praised only when it follows instructions. Curiosity is welcomed until it becomes inconvenient. Rest is rarely discussed except as a reward for exhaustion, and then we grow up. We carry those same beliefs into adulthood. We judge our worth by our output. We call ourselves failures when we struggle with motivation, even though no one ever taught us what real motivation feels like. And if we can't stick to a routine or a goal or a plan, we assume it's a character flaw, rather than a signal that the way we were taught to learn was never designed with our nervous systems, our rhythms, or our unique intelligences in mind. What if the parts of you that feel sluggish, distracted, or avoidant are actually intelligent responses to a system that never honored who you are? What if you're not resisting effort, but resisting emptiness? So many people I've worked with or spoken to think of themselves as lazy, but when I ask about what they care about, when I really listen to their stories, I almost always find that they're full of energy when they're doing something that matters to them. I've seen people who couldn't get out of bed for weeks come alive overnight when given the freedom to pursue something that actually lights them up. And yet, that same person, when placed back into the structure of someone else's goals, someone else's values, someone else's timeline, collapses again, not because they're weak, but because they've never been taught to trust their own way of moving through the world. Most of what we call laziness is not a lack of effort. It's a lack of alignment. It's the fatigue of trying to fit a life that doesn't feel like your own. It's the exhaustion of carrying beliefs that tell you you're never enough. It's the confusion of being told to chase goals that don't resonate, using tools that don't work for you, and being blamed when it all falls apart. It's not laziness, it's grief. It's grief for the parts of yourself that have been overlooked, denied, mislabeled. And maybe you've started to internalize that grief. Maybe it's shaped the way you see yourself. Maybe you've stopped even dreaming about doing things differently because trying feels like too much. Or maybe you still dream, but you punish yourself for not acting fast enough, big enough, often enough, and the more you push, the more stuck you feel. If this feels familiar, I want to say something as clearly as I can. You are not broken. You are not lazy. You are responding with quiet wisdom to a world that hasn't made space for your natural way of being. And that doesn't mean you're doomed to stay stuck. Quite the opposite. It means that there's a doorway here, a soft, slow, gentle doorway to a new kind of learning. One that begins not with discipline or pressure or even motivation, but with compassion. Because the truth is, you can't beat yourself into clarity. You can't shame yourself into alignment, and you can't hate yourself into transformation. You have to listen patiently, lovingly. You have to ask, what feels alive to me? What am I drawn to, even if I don't know why? What kind of structure makes me feel safe enough to begin? What rhythm does my body want to move in, if I stop forcing it to match someone else's pace? This kind of inquiry isn't glamorous. It's not always productive in the ways we've been taught to measure, but it's honest, and it's where true energy begins, because energy doesn't come from pushing through. It comes from aligning what you do with who you are. And so if you've been calling yourself lazy, I want to invite you to pause. Really pause. Notice what happens when you remove the label. What if, instead of lazy, you were unmet? Instead of unmotivated, you were misaligned. Instead of undisciplined, you were waiting for the right kind of invitation. What if your resistance isn't the problem, but the guide? What if your procrastination is a clue, not a curse? There's a softness in this approach, not weakness, but gentleness. And that gentleness holds power, because it allows you to move from a place of respect, not resentment, from partnership with yourself, not war against yourself. And that's where change becomes possible, not because you force it, but because you finally stop forcing. You're not lazy, you just learned wrong. But now, with new awareness, you have the opportunity to learn again. In a way that actually honors you, in a way that sustains you, in a way that invites your real self to the table, and maybe, for the first time, that voice in your head, the one that's been so critical, starts to soften too. Maybe it starts to say something new, something like it's okay. You were doing your best with what you were taught, but now we're going to try a different way. Let that be your beginning. Let's slow down for a moment and ask a question that very few of us ever pause to consider. What does learning actually feel like inside your body? For most people, learning has been defined by performance. The right answer, the correct process, the clean result. We're rewarded when we do it right and corrected, sometimes harshly when we don't. So over time, many of us stopped listening to the experience of learning itself. We started to focus only on outcomes, but if you pay attention, not to your grades or results or productivity, but to your actual lived experience, you'll find that learning is not a straight line. It doesn't happen the way we were taught to expect. It's not clean or predictable. It's messy. It stutters. It fails. It repeats. And it always asks for patience. Learning is like movement. The body doesn't master a new skill through explanation alone. It needs repetition. It needs time. It needs space to fail, space to recover, space to explore. And the mind works in much the same way. Except we forget that because the world around us rarely honors this truth. So we blame ourselves. We try to force our minds to behave in a way that matches external systems. We think if we can't sit still and focus for 8 hours, we must be broken. If we can't follow a strict routine, we must be lazy. But would you call a dancer lazy because they don't move like a runner? Would you call a violinist lazy because they can't play drums? We are all built differently. Our minds respond to rhythm, curiosity, meaning. They come alive when conditions match our nature, and they retreat when they don't. This is what most people miss when they call themselves lazy. They're looking at a symptom, not a cause. They're treating their resistance as a moral failure instead of a biological and emotional signal. Consider this. When your body is tired, you don't assume you're bad. You know you need rest. But when your mind resists a task, when it feels tired, numb, or anxious, you may assume the worst about yourself. You may conclude that you just don't have what it takes. But mental fatigue, emotional disconnection, and resistance are forms of intelligence. They're messages. They tell us that something is out of alignment. That something is missing. For many people, that missing piece is safety. Learning requires a nervous system that feels secure, and yet most of us were taught under threat. Threat of failure, judgment, comparison. That kind of pressure doesn't inspire true engagement. It creates a surface-level compliance, a fragile kind of discipline that collapses under the weight of real life. And then we wonder why we procrastinate. We wonder why we start projects and abandon them. We wonder why the spark fades just as we begin to make progress. But here's what's happening beneath the surface. Your mind is trying to protect you from conditions that feel unsafe. Not physically unsafe, perhaps, but psychologically threatening. Environments that strip away joy, tasks that are devoid of meaning, routines that ignore your energy cycles. Learning under pressure is like trying to grow a plant with no sunlight. Now, imagine something different. Imagine learning the way a child plays when no one's watching. There's no pressure to perform, no expectation of perfection, just curiosity, just movement, just exploration. This is how our minds want to engage with the world, not through rigid discipline, but through deep internal motivation, through interest, through connection. It's not that structure is bad, far from it. Structure can be deeply supportive when it's aligned with who you are. But most people were given the wrong kind of structure. They were handed someone else's blueprint and told to build their life with it. And when it didn't fit, they blamed themselves instead of the blueprint. Some people thrive with lists and schedules. Others need visual cues, physical movement, or social accountability. Some people learn best by listening, others by doing, others by teaching what they're trying to understand. There is no single right way, only the way that works for you, and yet, many of us try to fit into a system that ignores this truth. We buy planners we never use. We download apps we forget about. We mimic the routines of successful people who live entirely different lives from ours. And all the while, we tell ourselves that we're the problem. But what if we paused that narrative? What if we became curious about the way our minds naturally move toward what matters? What if we looked at our so-called laziness as a compass, not a flaw, but a clue? Maybe you put off starting things not because you're weak, but because you haven't found a way in that speaks to your nature. Maybe you can't stick to certain habits not because you lack willpower, but because they were built without rhythm, without pleasure, without meaning, without any connection to the kind of learner you are. We've been conditioned to believe that effort must be unpleasant, that discipline must be punishing, that growth must be hard, and while there is certainly discomfort in growth, it doesn't have to be cruel. It doesn't have to come from force. True learning is like tuning an instrument. It takes sensitivity. You listen, you adjust, you try again. You don't accuse the instrument of failure. You work with it. You attune yourself to its needs. You notice what throws it out of harmony and what brings it back. Your mind deserves the same care. So if you've been struggling, I want to ask you a few quiet questions. When do you feel most alive? What kinds of activities draw you in without effort? What times of day feel mentally open for you, and what times feel closed? When have you learned something joyfully, easily, almost by accident? What kind of environment makes you feel creative? And most importantly, when do you feel safe enough to try, fail, and try again? These are not trivial questions. They are the foundation of a new kind of learning, a learning rooted in awareness, compassion, and fit. A learning that honors your nervous system, your personality, your body, your spirit, because the truth is, when learning is aligned, it creates energy, it doesn't deplete you, it enlivens you, it brings you into connection with yourself, with your purpose, with the world. You don't need more pressure. You don't need more self-punishment. You need permission to learn in the way you were built to learn. And yes, that might mean unlearning a lot of what you were taught. It might mean stepping outside the systems that have defined success for you. It might mean slowing down before you can speed up, but it will be real. It will be yours, and in time, it will feel like coming home. So the next time you feel the weight of resistance, pause before you label it laziness. Listen, ask it what it's trying to protect you from. Ask what it's missing. Ask what it needs in order to feel safe, curious, and engaged again. Because your mind is not your enemy. It is not a machine to be controlled. It is an ecosystem to be nurtured, and when you learn to work with it instead of against it, the whole world begins to open, not because you tried harder, but because, for the first time, you were finally aligned. Relearning is not glamorous work. It's quiet, often invisible. It doesn't earn quick praise or social applause, but it is some of the most important, intimate work you'll ever do, because it's the work of returning to yourself. Slowly, gently, and without the armor you once needed just to survive. When people imagine transformation, they often picture dramatic change, new routines, massive productivity, new habits formed overnight. But real change, the kind that lasts, the kind that reaches the roots, is subtler than that. It begins not with action, but with attention. It begins when you stop trying to fix yourself long enough to actually see yourself. And this is what relearning really is. It's seeing yourself with new eyes. You've spent years, maybe decades, responding to systems that trained you how to behave, not how to understand yourself. They rewarded you when you fit in and corrected you when you didn't. And over time, you may have started to confuse obedience with growth or performance with worth. But somewhere along the way, that old model stopped working. Maybe it never worked, but you made it work for a while by pushing through, by tightening up, by overfunctioning, until the pressure cracked your willpower, until you couldn't keep up the performance anymore, until something in you said, enough. And maybe that's where you are now, somewhere between burnout and numbness, between desire and paralysis, between what you thought would work and what's actually sustainable. If that's where you are, it's not a failure. It's an invitation. Relearning begins here, with the honest realization that the old ways are no longer working, and the courageous decision not to return to them, even if you don't yet know what the new way will be, even if it's terrifying to let go. It takes bravery to unlearn, because unlearning means loosening your grip on the identities that once made you feel safe. The identity of the hard worker, the high achiever, the one who gets things done. It means stepping outside the lines you were taught to color within and asking, what if I'm allowed to do this differently? And at first, that question can feel destabilizing. You might feel like you're floating without a map. Because when you stop defining yourself by what you produce, you're left with a deeper question. Who am I when I'm not performing? That question is the doorway. You can't rush through it. You can't muscle your way into a new life with the same pressure you've been trying to escape. You have to slow down, get still, and begin to listen. Relearning often starts with the simplest, smallest moments, waking up and asking, how do I feel, instead of, what do I have to do? Choosing to take a breath when your old instinct is to speed up. Giving yourself permission to move at the pace of understanding, not urgency. And perhaps most importantly, it means letting go of the lie that growth has to hurt to count. For many of us, pain became a proof of worth. If it was hard, we thought it meant we were doing it right. If we suffered, it must mean we were committed. But what if effort doesn't have to equal suffering? What if growth could feel like grace, not punishment? This doesn't mean relearning is always easy. It won't be. There will be friction. There will be discomfort. But it will be clean pain, not the distorted kind that comes from self-rejection, but the kind that accompanies healing, the kind that clears space for something real to grow. Because to relearn, you have to confront not just what you do, but why you do it. You have to ask, whose voice is this telling me to push harder? Whose story am I living out by staying stuck? Whose definition of success am I still trying to live up to? These are difficult questions. They may lead you back to moments you'd rather not revisit, early memories, old teachers, the unspoken rules of your family or culture. But looking at these things is not about blame, it's about clarity. It's about seeing the architecture of your inner world so you can begin to redesign it in a way that serves your truth. And when you begin this process, really begin, you'll notice something remarkable. The pressure starts to ease. The noise in your head gets quieter, not because everything is fixed, but because you're no longer at war with yourself. You begin to experiment instead of expect. You give yourself the same grace you'd offer a friend who's learning something new. You allow for mess, you allow for pauses, you allow for realignment, and this is where the magic happens, not in some overnight transformation, but in the slow accumulation of tiny, self-honoring choices. Like setting boundaries around your energy, like choosing work that aligns with your values, not just your resume, like making space for wonder, not just productivity, like recognizing that joy is not a distraction from your goals. It is a guide toward them. Relearning also means returning to your natural rhythms. Most of us have internal clocks that don't match the artificial structures we're told to follow. You might do your best thinking late at night, or need more frequent breaks than others. You might learn better through listening than reading, or by trying and failing than by planning perfectly. These preferences aren't flaws, they're data. They're clues to your design. And once you stop judging them, you can begin to work with them. This is what it means to build a life that fits. Not to copy someone else's formula, but to become fluent in your own language, to discover the patterns and conditions that allow you to thrive, and then shape your days accordingly. And the beautiful thing is, this process is self-reinforcing. The more you act in alignment, the more energy you have. The more energy you have, the more motivated you feel. And motivation born of alignment is sustainable in a way that motivation born of pressure never is. Because when you're aligned, you're no longer running from shame. You're moving toward meaning, and this kind of movement isn't frantic. It's steady, it's deep, it's yours. So let go of the myth that you have to earn your worth through struggle. Let go of the idea that discipline means denying your nature. Let go of the rules that were never written for you, and begin again. Begin with curiosity. Begin with kindness. Begin with the question, what would it look like to learn in a way that honors who I am? And then listen for the quiet answers. They won't arrive all at once, but they will come slowly, patiently. They will come in the form of new habits, new boundaries, new instincts. They will come in the form of restored confidence, not the kind that boasts, but the kind that rests. Eventually, you'll look back and realize that the person you once called lazy was never lazy at all. They were exhausted, misunderstood, disconnected from their truth, and now, deconnected, realigned, re-empowered. They're simply learning differently. And maybe, for the first time, learning joyfully.